Good evening, everybody. It's a clear reflection of the importance of the topic that I have such an amazing gathering out here, despite weather possibly threatening to play truant, and of course Wimbledon playing strong out there, right? So I hope I keep you all equally entertained, if not more, and of course hope to deliver on the value addition. I would like today to be more of an interactive session. I did not therefore intend a presentation. This is out here only for the limited purpose of giving you all some quotations which I thought would give us some way forward, a roadmap for the discussions that are to come up. Because as Vikram mentioned, we are in fact dealing with two very complicated topics out here. So here we are talking about liberty. All of you all had the liberty to stay at home, watch Wimbledon, right? Or just put your feet up and enjoy yourself. All of you all also had the liberty to be here, to hear me, and to participate in the discussion. Obviously, you have all exercised your choice. I think in a way that underlines what we are here to talk about as liberty. It's a matter of choice and how we exercise it. Well, if it were that simple, then why don't we all pack up and go home? Why wouldn't we, right? Because as with every concept, nothing in life is that simple. Everything is so nuanced, everything has its layers, that we now have to delve further into what more does liberty have to offer. And when we apply the same concept to the cyber world, not just what it has to offer, but what has the domain opened out to us? How has it created this new world for us, which is just there for us to explore? And what are the threats or consequences of that exploration? So very quickly I thought I'm not going to just rely on my words, but of a few experts when we talk about liberty. And who better than Chomsky to start off with? This is what Chomsky himself borrows from Bakunin to say, I'm a fanatic lover of liberty, under which intelligence, dignity, and human happiness can develop and grow. Not the purely formal liberty conceded, measured out, and regulated by the state, an eternal lie, which in reality represents nothing more than the privilege of some founded on the slavery of the rest. So, in effect, what he has captured over here is to talk about that concept of choice which we exercise, which is inherent in us, as opposed to that which is given as a dispensation to us in a very regulated or measured manner. So when we talk about liberty that is inherent with us, it is a matter of choice which we exercise as we see fit. We may do it right, we may get it wrong, but at the end of the day, it's something we decided. But when a government or a state gets into the picture, in effect, what they are doing is they are stepping into your shoes to then tell you what is good for you and what is not. What you do thereafter in terms of exercising your right is still liberty, but that is liberty which is not absolute. But when we talk about absolute liberty, what are again the nuances or the pitfalls in that? When we go forward, you realize then what it is. I'm jumping straight from Chomsky to the cyber world. If we are talking about, and that's the beauty of this cyber world. All of us were born into a world which was already regulated. None of us here are old enough to claim to be part of a world where, we were born free and we die free, right? So we take that level of regulation for granted. We assume it to be part of our lives. We do not even think about it, as regulation, but as the norm. And that is social engineering, where mentally we have already decided this is right, this is wrong, and therefore if I follow right, I am still following the liberty that I was born with, right? So that has been defied and turned on its head completely by the cyber world. It gave us a domain where we could roam free. It told us that if you're a woman who is scared of stepping out in the dark, here are your dark alleys where you can still do it with a level of dissociation which allows you entry and exit at your whim and fancy. So if you're going to exercise that right, you may do so with the consequences that ensue, but that consequence or that cost is yours alone. So here we have this domain which opened out an opportunity for each of us to express ourselves and express ourselves freely. It gave us an opportunity. We did not have to wait for a publisher to come and publish a book like I had to, right? You can just go out there and blog today. You can write what you want, but you have to of course face the consequences of that action. But when you write, you fully understand that and you go forward. So this is the liberty that cyberspace gave to you, of being able to roam the world, to connect with the world with just the click of a button. John Perry Barlow, and as far back as 96, talked about it as a declaration of independence of the cyberspace. He's been pretty mean to the governments. He calls them the governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel. I come from cyberspace, the home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask of you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome amongst us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. So these are the words which these cyber libertarians have immortalized as their mantra. So when they talk about liberty, they want to go back to that aspect of liberty which I spoke about as being born with it, with absolutely no fetters, with absolutely no restraints, and not something that has been dispensed out to you as a favor, but that which I will claim as a right. Now what happens with something like that, and it's very interesting that the cyber libertarians themselves qualify it as cyber anarchy. So we have always again grown up with our understanding that anarchy is a negative word. And here are a bunch of people who are embracing the word to mean that this is the liberty I have and this is the liberty I want to enjoy, and I am not going to let you governments intrude on this liberty. A lot of the debate on net neutrality today hinges on this concept of liberty. Net neutrality again has actually nothing to do with liberty or freedom. It is only that you keep the internet an even playing field as it was originally when it was born. Do not create layers or discriminations in it based on cost or expense. Do not allow industry to dictate which is the domain I would choose as opposed to the domain I want to be in. So this is simply what net neutrality gives us. So when we look beyond net neutrality, what is it that we would get? And before we go there, I thought I would just give you a little bit more in terms of what is it that a cyber libertarian looks at as anarchy. This is in the words of May T, that's his initial if you want to. So he claims that the net is an anarchy with no central control, no ruler, no leader and no laws. And this is exactly how they want to keep it. So today when we are having a debate about regulating the net, that when you combine the words of Chomsky with that of May or of Barlow, what you get is that they are saying that we want an absolutely unregulated net. Do not come into it. Do not intrude into our domain. We want to be lawless. We will decide as probably a matter of self-regulation what we want to do. The reason I am bringing in self-regulation here is that we are already aware that liberty may be effectively a utopian concept if it were not for regulation. Why would I say that? I thought we started off by saying liberty was all about doing whatever I wanted to do, right? So why would I say this? And I would draw a very simple reason for that, which is, isn't it always the case that our liberty extends only to the extent of our neighbor's nose? The minute it goes beyond that, are we not intruding on someone else's liberty? So there is conceptually no way that liberty can be exercised without that limit of a restraint, which ensures not just your liberty but also that of the other. And this is where regulation comes in, and this is where it becomes important for regulation to play a role without being intrusive. And that, finding that mean or median may be the basis for ensuring true liberty for all, which would of course mean a little bit of compromise from everybody's side. Denning and Bogg in fact lead to this concept when they say liberty or freedom is not, as the origin of the name may seem to imply, an exemption from all restraints, but rather the most effectual applications of every just restraint. So the emphasis there is on that it should be a just or reasonable restraint and not something that is excessive or where the restraint itself becomes anarchy. So just to, so one request is that I just have a very short introductory portion, after which I would like to open it out for discussion. So please bear with me till then. And then she goes on to say that the just restraint to all members of a free society, whether they be magistrates or subjects. So when we talk about this in the concept of state, one other aspect that the cyberspace did, and this is a theme which runs through my book also, is that I love this phrase which I've used there, which is, I call it the reversal of the continental drift. You know what the continental drift did in terms of separating all of us, and I'm sure a lot of us out here have gone through that stage where we would have relatives living abroad. We would wait for that one airmail letter to come, and for you to send a letter back, and that person out there will be waiting for it, and it would probably be a month or more. Of course the cost played a factor in that also. So this was what communication was all about. Today you're looking at your relatives across nation states. There are no boundaries for relationships to thrive, whether they are individual relationships or business relationships or for nation states to reach out. So cyberspace again removed all concepts of boundaries and created a borderless and seamless state, and thereby reversed the continental drift. But having done that, when we talk about liberty and fair restraint, the issue then next becomes of sovereignty and territoriality. Who decides what is just restraint? What is just restraint for India may not necessarily be so for the US, similarly not quite so for China or Russia. Merely because it is not just restraint by your threshold, would you then judge some other country's just restraint as unjust? How are we going to balance out each person's concept of liberty? Becomes the next issue. And in that, Everhart talks about how the concept of statehood has disappeared. One of the other concepts that the cyber libertarians keep proposing or propounding is that there is no statehood. So when you talk about no statehood, you can either decide that there is no statehood, no laws, no restraints, or you can say, okay, we have a state and that state decides whatever it wants to do. So they also argue the reverse in saying that it is a state in itself, which is the cyber world. How is it a state? So when you look at what defines a statehood, one is boundaries, the second is identity. So today when we started this program with the national anthem, it is our national anthem which we started with. So there is an identification with that anthem and with our statehood as Indians, right? So that identity defines also, because a state without its citizens is nothing, it's a non-entity. So you have a defined boundary, you have an identity, and the third aspect is that construct of state presupposes that we have subjected our liberty, our rights, which had no restraints, to that of the state on the assumption that the state will reciprocate by protecting us. So a rule of law is a third concept which we would assume as a part of statehood. So when we talk about cyberspace as statehood, what do we get? You know, where is that boundary? The boundary is wherever you have cyberspace permeating. Where is the identity? Netizens is the identity. You know, how do you enter into the state? The minute you log into a computer is, according to the libertarians, the stage when you have entered into this digital domain. You now have, in fact, places like Second Life where you can literally lead an alternate identity or existence. There are too many of the millennials who live more on the digital world than in the real world. So much so that they would really take offense to me referring to this as the real world, because the cyber world is as real to them as this world is to us. So given this situation, are they too wrong in assuming that the cyber world is a state in itself? And regulation, that's where we come to this concept of liberty again. You know, there was this one case, if you Google a rape in cyberspace, you will come across this very sad instance of an in-game rape by one avatar of another. What did this person do? He hacked into the game and he started bullying and harassing the other players. So the owners, the creators of the game then had to take action. The issue that arose in the debates that followed was about what exactly is allowed or permissible in the cyber domain. Do our ideals of morality, you know, just and fair play, conscience, do all these concepts have an equal play in the cyber world as it does in the real world? Are crimes in the real world carried over to the cyber world, and should there be a restriction on that? In this instance, it was self-regulation which stopped perpetuation of this crime further, because it was not like the hacker wanted to just stop with harassing one person. And the person who was virtually raped went on record to say that she actually felt as if she has been physically raped. You know, so that's the impact that the cyber world can have, and therefore the concept of liberty needs to extend with certain restraints possibly into this world. Now going forward, with respect to statehood and sovereignty is what, again, another thought I want to throw out into the air for further discussion. Now when we talk about this possibility of cyber as a state, or each nation state taking control within its territory of what happens, you know, even in the cyber world, the next issue that arises is how are they going to take control of it? Where does the territoriality then lie? It's very simple actually. When you look at the cyber world, you realize that it is not as much an either as we seem to assume it to be. It's anchored somewhere. Where is it anchored? It is always anchored to that jurisdiction where the computer is anchored. In many instances, in terms of, for instance, I can give you examples already of how it cannot be anchored. A denial of service attack is usually a distributed denial of service attack, for instance, is launched by one person taking control of multiple computers affected by botnets, which are also called as zombie computers. In the case of, in 2007, Estonia became a victim to a distributed denial of service attack. 27,000 computers from over 27 countries were used for the attack. So then if I'm talking about an anchoring at some country, then where is the anchor here, you may ask, right? So the anchor then becomes every single point of offense, or simpler still, the point of consequence of this attack. Our Indian law also recognizes that wherever the attack may have begun or ensued, that place where the attack, you know, has a consequence, where the victim could be just a computer or a device also. So wherever the victim is also gives you a right of jurisdiction, and there lies your anchor. Now we have established that a possibility could be that you could possibly regulate this domain. Then where do we stand? I could not rely on a better a better quote than that of Justice Krishna Iyer. He talks about enforcement as a rule of law hangs limp or barks but never bites if it is ineffective. So what we really need today, if we are talking about liberty and ensuring liberty is also regulation which is on one hand not going to interfere with our liberty, but is going to actually protect that liberty by ensuring that somebody else does not violate it. So that's the balance which ought to be achieved. I would not say which is being even attempted to be achieved today, and I'll give 3 more examples before I throw it open to the floor. So what ought to be a utopian situation would be this balance of ensuring our liberty without infringing it, because this liberty, even in the physical world, as the Bombay High Court observed, was very hard fought and obtained. We should not throw it away in the cyber world also merely out of fear. Attacks will happen. There are absolutely no systems which are 100% safe. Whatever you may be told, be prepared for the contrary, because it's almost a challenge to every expert to actually break a system just to show that it can be broken into, not merely to always cause loss. One of the most interesting stories on that was Tesla was one of the first to do this amazing callback of more than nearly about 30,000 cars. And do you know how they did the callback? And it was for a very serious problem in the spark plug, which could have ignited the car itself. They did not have to bring 30,000 cars to their factory. They did not have to go to 30,000 customers to repair it. What they did was ask the customers to link their cars to the internet, and the software patch was downloaded to the car. That was their idea of recall, and that's where technology takes you today. Because when we are talking about a computer device today, we are not talking about this machinery, just our mobile phones. Everything contains computing today, from your everyday consumer products like washing machines and refrigerators, your baby monitors, cameras, everything has computing in it, and definitely your cars. So in retaliation to that, to show that Tesla is not perfect, it's attributed to the Chinese, I do not know that. They hacked into Tesla cars to show that they are not invulnerable. So this is where we stand. So attack is a given. So what do we do to protect ourselves? Now what is happening today is twofold when we talk about liberty and the balance. We are being asked to compromise on our liberties in the name of security. How many times have we all been frisked in a day? How many times have we subjected ourselves to a security check every time you enter or exit a building? How many times have we even mentally questioned ourselves on whether that was necessary or not? Any single attack in some part of the world triggers this paranoia, and we subject ourselves unquestioningly to this physical frisking. But when it came to the cyber frisking of surveillance, of infringement of privacy, the cyber libertarians again rebelled. So one of the instances or the reasons for encryption was that the US wanted to bring in this technology called the Clipper technology, which would have provided them with a backdoor to each computer that was being manufactured. So Zimmerman protested this, and that's how pretty good privacy or that encryption standard came out. Now with this also came out a parallel society which has now turned seriously dark. The darknet, which was originally intended as a paradise for libertarians to voice whatever they wanted to say without fear of repercussion, has now become also a domain for criminals to do what they want without repercussions. So the enforcers have also resorted to vigilante justice, including in the darknet, by bringing down sites. Where is the due process in that? How many of these persons are thereafter being subjected to due process is moot, though of course the Silk Road case is before courts now. So given this situation, given the fact that this cyber liberty has also given rise to organizations like Anonymous, which takes pride in the fact that they will decide what is right. They bring down Twitter accounts when they say that they assume that to be that of some of the terrorist activities. They bring down court websites because they did not particularly like the judgment that a court has given. So I'm giving you two extreme examples of how vigilantism could go. And this is also an exercise of liberty. How much that infringes on our liberty, again, is out there for us to discuss. When we are talking about liberty, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, and we're talking about surveillance, is of privacy. Judge Brandeis was credited with immortalizing this words of right to be let alone. That's the concept of privacy. So when we are talking about privacy, there are two aspects of it. And I have put it in another way of that, that privacy stands turned on its head today because of social media. Because what is the right that we are exercising today? It's the right to share all with the world, aren't we? There is nothing that is secretive, there is nothing that we will not share with the world. That brings with it its own vulnerabilities, it creates threats, but again, it's an exercise of our freedom, it's an exercise of our liberty. How far that exercise of liberty can go, how far it can affect us is again a moot issue. I can give you two examples in that, just to move on very quickly. One was a very sad case of a very good teacher who was on vacation, and as a lark, she takes a picture at a graveyard showing the finger. She did not have a job to come back to. So this is one possibility of privacy going horribly wrong. We have many instances where employers are doing their background check using social media. So where we thought we could exercise our liberty even to our own detriment, today is a situation where we may have to rethink choice, right? This is where we stand in terms of privacy. Now when we talk about, again, moving on to privacy, then automatically leads us to another concept which has gained codification in Europe, but which remains to be seen, as a future in India, the right to be forgotten. So let's take the same example of the teacher, or for that matter, there's this leading case in international case of Kosteja, who underwent a litigation, and there was a news article about two of his properties going under auction. But that was reversed, and he succeeded in his litigation. But the news stories continued. So therefore, he said that I have a right to be forgotten because this story is creating a negative impact on my reputation. So this was upheld, though the courts also held that Google was not wrong in not removing it at his request. The GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, which will be applicable to the entire European Union come 2018 May, that has codified the right to be forgotten. And it talks about how and in what manner it can be exercised. In a way, this right to be forgotten also is an exercise of our liberty, because if we have exercised our liberty in sharing with the world that we thought was appropriate at a particular point of time. I'll give an example for all our young audience here. We've all been young at some point of time. We will do things which will embarrass us in the future, possibly. But we, in our generation, have the liberty to forget and move on. But in today's generation, they do not have that liberty. It is once you put it out there, let me tell you, that digital footprint is always there. It could be in one resource, it could be in many resources, but it is out there. So what is it that you can do as you grow up and you say, look, I no longer want to be associated with that. It could just be an embarrassing picture, it could be a relationship you want to move on from. You are entitled to it. You're entitled to share that photograph of that relationship and for it to be forgotten. So these are things, again, a matter of choice and liberty, which ought to be codified. Finally, when we move forward, I thought the best words I could close this preliminary portion was one with our own constitutional mandate, which is for liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. It's a very wide range of liberties which are enshrined, and we need to figure out how best it's going to be protected. And when we are trying to balance between the rights of nations and that of individuals, between the rights of possibly businesses and that of competitors, between the rights of one individual to another, I would love to draw on Cicero to say the good of the people is the greatest law. So what we should really be looking at as a possibility should be that balance. Again, we do not know whether it's going to be possible, but that balance which will ensure protecting our liberties, protecting our choice, without it intruding on somebody else's. Finally, today we are at a situation where somebody just wrote about drawing from George Orwell of how even your thoughts are not free of government surveillance. So with that thought, I want to open this discussion out to your concepts of liberty and your questions on that, on how free are we really? Are even our thoughts dictated? And I would not say that it is wrong, because I have seen that happen. After the news about Snowden's revelations came out, people stopped writing to their compatriots in the US using words like terror, jihadi, etc. People in the US would refuse to acknowledge mails like that because there was complete paranoia about how they would be perceived. So this is literally intruding into our thoughts and action, and not just at a superficial level. So with this, please, all of you please chip in, and I'd like to throw the floor open.
Ultimately, what we know as internet is nothing but bunch of contracts. Access contracts, transit contracts, peering contracts, nothing but contracts. The physical cables are owned by somebody. You're just getting access for a fair price. Today, now, the whole story around net neutrality, the whole content story is, in my view, it's overplayed up. The economics of running a network are great because everybody's fighting to go towards zero. See, how many of you know that the actual cost of the internet connection that comes to your house actually costs 20 to 30 times that it is actually charged? Somebody's paying for it. Now you are giving up something for that privilege. So, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. We are doing it knowingly. What are we doing with JioPhone? I mean, it's free for 2 months, but do you think 3 months later will it be free? No way. So, privacy, go home. I mean, it's not going to be happening.
I'm so glad you brought that up, So one of my favorite statements is, that F word, the 4-letter word that all of us love to embrace and love to hear is free, right? It's a magic word for us. The minute somebody says free, whether we want it or not, we want to grab it. So, we have to remember there is no such thing as a free lunch.
Except Manthan.
Thank you. I fully endorse that, except Manthan. Lovely samosas and tea at that. Don't you dare say it's not free, right? So, just to complete that thought, sir. Okay.
Internet is in fact free. The infrastructure is a one-time investment. You find only electromagnetic waves.
So, if I may just take that thought through it. So, when I chose this concept of liberty, one other aspect I wanted to touch upon, therefore I was really glad that the gentleman brought it up, is this distinction between free and freedom. So, what I have talked about up to now is only about freedom, not about the word free. So, unfortunately, a lot of the populace mixes up these two things. Remember, there is no such thing as free. But freedom, yes, it's a freedom to use. It's not about free, right? Why am I saying there is no such thing as free? Like he rightly said, it's about connectivity that he's talking about. Let's move beyond connectivity. I'm sure, I'm not going to ask you all this question, how many of you all have smartphones? May I ask how many of you all do not have smartphones? See, you are the smart ones out there, I can tell you. So, given your demographic, I'm not surprised. One, you may not believe in it. Two, you must have realized that its use is too limited. Yes. You know, so this is the difficulty. But ask any millennial, it is an insult to them to even ask them that question, right? So why is that so? You have a smartphone, and let me talk about us, the mid-levels, you know. We are called the digital immigrants, because we were not born to it, we have migrated into it. So that migration is very clear from the way we approach it also, you know, with some fear, some restraint. I told you, we were born into a world of many restraints. So when we have been given this freedom, on one extreme, we love to just go all out and put everything out there. And on the other, we do it with a lot of fear also. So you know that there are at least 100 apps in each of these smartphones, right? How many do we digital immigrants use? 3, 5, that's it, right? The millennials not only use everything that comes with the phone, everything that says the magic word free, they download it. I mean, like games, absolutely, right? Who would say no to that free game? Does it have some kind of a Chinese link or a strange sounding creator? Never mind, we'll worry about it later. And one of these digital natives, as the millennials are called, asked me. I said, look, I'm a little paranoid about all these apps, knowing where I'm going, what I'm doing, etc. And her response was actually so simple. She said, so what? Who cares? What are they going to do with knowing where you go or what you do? Let me tell you, that is one of the most precious commodity today, data. So that is what you're really paying for, that data about you. Some of the data collection is innocent, but many of it may not quite be so. When next time you download an app, please read through, not the terms and conditions, I'm sure nobody would, because there is a study which says that for every digital medium we use, if we are to read each and every terms and conditions, we'll spend our entire lifetime doing just that. Then when will we use that domain, right? So let's not go into that aspect, but please read at least what is it that you're giving away for that free app. You'll be giving away access to your camera, to your microphone, to your location services. So everything and anything about you, what you do, where you are, where you shop, so that also defines who you are, and each of these instances are used for marketing purposes today. But that data resides somewhere, and therefore the vulnerability also. And in one instance where a lot of, in fact, enforcement authority personnel downloaded this app, they were shocked to find out that everything that they were talking amongst themselves was also captured by the microphone. So please Google this and look. Mark Zuckerberg was giving a session. Unlike me, he had both his camera and the microphone blocked. And that's how he is at home also. So my strong advice on this is, you would not take a video camera into the bathroom. You would not take a video camera into your private domains at home. Your mobile phone is as good as that. Either switch it off, as you said, which is impossible. There is no such thing as switching off in this world, right? Exercise caution. Be aware of where you're taking, what you're doing, what you're sharing. That caution may be sufficient. You know, let's not become paranoid in the process. Yes, sir, the next one.
Almost since civilization began, maybe in all countries, all geographies, all cultures across, we have had liberty and regulation. So if we look at with a larger perspective, has regulation helped us more or harmed us more? In case we can visualize a world where there is zero regulation, will man live happily like animals, or will he degrade into a demon?
Don't animals have regulations? It's more, it's built into their DNA in a way. So I would give a physical world example for this, sir. We have traffic signals, and then we have cops to regulate it, and we also have challans for people who are violating it, right? So therefore you have a world where there is a regulation which may or may not work, and which has multiple layers of it also, right? So how many times have we felt in some places where there may just be a traffic signal or just the cop, you know, one or the other element, or maybe even both, and felt, would it not have moved faster if it hadn't been for this, the traffic? So we are actually talking about a similar situation for the cyber world. So we have a situation where it has roamed free, it has had an existence where there were no regulations, not even parental controls as I've called it in the book, but it has evolved with some level of self-regulation. Without that self-regulation, it could not have evolved. Then it moved into this domain of government regulation. There may be conflicting regulations, and data protection is one area where you would see that. Multiple countries came in, multiple countries had varied levels of data protection. We of course are still waiting for a much stronger regime. We have something for it, but not very strong in that. So we had this situation already. So what we are looking at therefore is a situation where it's a relative term, where one set of people think it's excessive regulation and they would have been better off without it, and another set feel very secure because the regulation is there. And there is a third situation, I won't say set of people, third situation where I call it the safety net situation, which is that because you have regulation, sometimes you tend to share more, put things out there more, put yourself out there more than you ought to do. So as with any safety net, when you're asked to jump, thinking that you have the safety net out there, if the safety net catches you, good for you. If not, splat.
Yeah.
So back there.
Yeah, madam. In your talk, and whatever they asked, I was just waiting for the word virtual world. You used the word like real world and then cyber world. Is it gone nowadays, obsolete, or do you have the freedom to misuse? That word is gone nowadays.
The
Virtual
word or
virtual world.
the right to use or misuse the word or the world. Right?
World and word. Okay.
Yeah, so the virtual world very much exists, but the concept of cyber has grown way beyond just treating it as a virtual world. Today we talk more about the digital world as opposed to a virtual world, because you know there is an automatic correlation of virtual with the online domain. But as I was talking to you now, it's not just the online domain, it is a digital domain. That digital domain may even be offline, but it still impacts you. So virtual is neither dead, nor is it just used or abused, but both offline and online, but it has not been replaced. It has been supplemented with more descriptions. That is the only thing.
And freedom to be used, misused and used.
Okay, when you're talking about the freedom to misuse, I would put it slightly differently. It is a matter of how you exercise it. And as I mentioned earlier, when you exercise that freedom, you do it conscious or otherwise of the consequences that ensue from that.
Nappinai, I must compliment you on very clearly enunciating the principles that you did in your preface. So
Thank you.
that was very nice. Friends, likewise is the analysis of technology laws in the book that she has written. So please pick up a copy of the book and get it autographed by her after this talk.
Thank you, Ajay.
Two questions. One is, you were talking of liberty and cyberspace. How would you define liberty vis-a-vis the internet trolls which have become a nightmare today? One. Two, I'm told that Chinese are very high into cyber espionage, and there is a huge risk of Chinese equipment that one gets installed in countries across the world, especially very key installations in nuclear plants and so on and so forth, or all major issues, and that it is entirely possible that someday unexpectedly they may actually trigger a damage to key installations. Is that a real threat, and is that something that is being taken seriously?
Yeah, I'm going to take those questions in reverse. Yes, it is a serious threat according to me, but that's just my opinion. Probably I live in a very paranoid world, but one of the things that I have never understood the West of is we have a pretty strong IP domain, IP regime in India. We had the labor power, but the West, I'm not just saying US, but the West chose China as its preferred destination for outsourcing manufacturing. Even today, substantially a lot of it is manufactured outside. Some countries have already started putting in restraints in terms of outsourcing work, which is for critical infrastructure. But are we then just closing the stable door after the horse has bolted, right? It's already out there. There are these bugs or this botnets which are everywhere. It's only waiting to be activated. We are not going to know the extent of it because nobody has really gone into that issue, or at least I'm not aware of that. But there are enough studies to show that this is a real threat. We are talking Chinese today. We are only using China as an example because they had the opportunity. Let's take any country. The minute you say outsource and you're talking technology, are you not running that risk anyway? And like I said, when we talk technology, I am not talking just about electronic goods. I'm talking about any consumer good with computing in it. I'll give an example. Now, in one murder case in Arizona, the police asked Apple to help with its Apple Assistant. Why? Because they wanted to know what was the conversation that this accused, whom they suspected had at home, which they believed that the assistant would have captured. So you are now living in a completely connected world of Internet of Things, which is everywhere around you. We are not even aware in most of these cases. Most of it has very poor to non-existent security measures. And we are continuously under surveillance. We do not know where, who and how this data is being collected and transmitted to or shared with. So we have a situation of a state-sponsored surveillance or collection of data. A state, how do I put it, it could just be paid for, right? Or even a business can pay for it, an individual can pay for it. Today you can buy data, for instance, for all of $10 about somebody. Medical records are being sold like this and then misused. So when we talk about this kind of abuse or fear, it is everywhere. The minute you use technology, you are exposing yourself to this threat, but can you then live without technology? Not really. So be aware and be prepared, and according to me, that which, and in fact this forms part of many of the national cyber policies. You have all these wish lists, which is for a very safe and secure cyber domain without threats, or at least minimizing threats, creating awareness amongst the public. And you have a few more in the checklist, and way down is the most important thing, which is resilience. So for, again, to give an example, Ukraine was subjected to a power grid attack in December 2015. So the amazing part of that, as opposed to even Estonia, which was so tech savvy, was that Ukraine was able to bounce back within 3 hours. And they therefore averted a possibility of a terror situation, because people did not know what was happening. Even the telephone lines were brought down, and therefore they could have had a panic situation, which they averted. So I would say that if we are faced with this threat as an eventuality, then the only alternative is to have a good backup plan, a good cushion, a fallback cushion for a good bounce back. To come to your first question, could I therefore ask you to repeat that for the sake of the trolls? See, this goes to this gentleman's question earlier also about abusing the virtual domain. You are being subjected to that, right? Trolling sometimes can be innocent and mild to extreme. It can even cause physical harm. There was an act which was called the Megan-Mayer Act in the US. Unfortunately, it has not seen the light of day still, which happened because of cyberbullying through trolling, and where a child lost her life. And the bill was named after her, therefore. So we are facing this situation day in and day out. Celebrities, non-celebrities alike, everybody faces this. If you put yourself in this digital domain or virtual domain, as you want to call it, or the cyber domain, as we may probably broad base it, you are subjecting yourself to this possibility. What is the remedy then to that? One is that today you have a law in India for cyber stalking. You do not have a law for cyberbullying. 66A, which was struck down, could have been used for this purpose. but its rampant abuse ended up with the baby being thrown out with the bathwater. We do not have a law there for that, so we will have to make do with what there is. And then what happens is only where some harm ensues, the law then kicks into place. Let's look at the flip side of it to say, assuming that the law was there against cyberbullying also, there has to be a balance between what is the harm caused to the cost of enforcement. So most of the time, as with many laws which are already there, you have a law, but invariably moving the enforcement machinery becomes very difficult because there is a cost to benefit ratio that is being obliquely looked at. Nobody would admit it openly, but it is definitely there, right? So therefore, one is that you today do not have a law which is just generally for trolls, but where the trolls can cause harm, you can bring the law into motion. But even after you initiate action, it is still moot on how effective it's going to be.
A very engaging talk. In the context of personal liberty, what are your views on linking the Aadhaar number with the mobile phones and that data in the banking?
I would have been very surprised if this question had not arisen in today's discussion. So this is my opinion and my opinion only. I am completely paranoid about Aadhaar. The US has always had social security numbers. Nothing stopped India from pursuing or following that regime if what we wanted was a single identity document to help across mediums. Why did we want to go into this domain of biometrics? Aren't we exposing a very innocent populace which has not really identified the threats to security, to their personal liberty, and to their economic liberty by giving away this most precious of sensitive personal information? I would again quote Kaffenberger to say that there are only two kinds of computers or computer resources. One that has been hacked, one that is waiting to be hacked, right? So given this situation, what really is that sense of security you're giving to this populace when you're collecting information which cannot be replaced? It's not like a social security number which is hacked. It's not like your credit and debit card numbers which did get hacked recently, right? So what is this safety net or safety cushion that you're giving? Isn't it the same safety net syndrome which I mentioned earlier? So you're all safe until you're violated. So I'm all against it. I do hope some action is taken in this behalf to not have Aadhaar thrust down our throat. I'm really concerned for those people who have adopted or adapted it merely out of a sense of fear, because again, what is the government doing to us that a criminal is not doing? When a criminal today calls you for a phishing attack, they will scare you to say, oh, your credit card will get cancelled. Your bank account will get frozen if you do not share this information. So even the most educated amongst us immediately share details, which we would otherwise not share. We do not realize that is as good as giving away the key to our front door or the key to our bank lockers. That's what we are doing. So that same sense of fear and urgency is what Aadhaar has done to us. Saying, if you do not do this, you will be deprived of the subsidy. If you do not do this, you can... I find it most ironic when I'm being told that if you do not link your Aadhaar with your PAN number, you cannot pay taxes. How many of us are going to object to that, right? So I would definitely want that to be revisited.
I have three questions. One is there a law against good morning messages?
I can quickly answer that saying there should be.
The second one is a little more serious. As Abraham Lincoln once said, don't believe everything on the internet. I want to know, is there a law I can see an offshoot of that when someone said that the group administrator of a WhatsApp has to go in
Yes.
For falsification of data or whatever it is. How valid in law is that, and will it stand?
Actually, your second question itself should be split into two parts. You had raised the second aspect was about the liability of the group administrator. I would like to take the topic of fake news separately because it's a very interesting aspect on that itself. The first question though, it's not as frivolous as you may have thought it was. because spamming is against the law. So the denial of service attack primarily took into aspect the concept of spamming. It just becomes denial of service when the spamming becomes so much that it blocks out your site or your server. So even in terms of privacy, the issue about spamming is before the Supreme Court, but it has not seen the light of day. So taking that aspect further to spamming, I would say there should be something on that. Now to fake news. It's a very interesting situation. Now a lot of competitors, businesses, politics, nation states have all resorted to this aspect of fake news for its benefit, and not just all of them. There are also instances of do-gooders or NGOs also resorting to what is being termed as fake news, and I'll explain why on that. There was this one page that was put up and Greenpeace was attributed with that, but when you looked at the page you will not think Greenpeace. It had a logo on top, no name, but the logo is easily identifiable with Shell, the oil company, right? And the news over there was absolutely contra. It was about, you know, there would be a picture of a whale and it would have a news about how, you know, Shell is the most amazing, I mean, this is the most, they won't name it anywhere, but this is the most amazing company. It can kill marine life in, you know, in a moment of seconds within this area, you know, kind of negative news. So this was one way they, you know, very innovatively thought they could use a company's logo against itself. Whilst that was a blatant misuse in itself, there is a local case of an equivalent. Greenpeace here, of course, a named defendant in this case, created a game called Tata versus Turtle. So the Tatas, and their case was that the Tatas were actually affecting the environment of the Oliver Ridley turtles, and therefore they should be stopped. And their way of creating awareness about this was through this game. So when the Tatas objected, they took the IPR route and they said it is actually affecting my IP right and therefore you should stop them. The Delhi High Court refused to intervene in this, saying that this aspect or the possibility that what you are doing may impact them is information or news that is bound, you know, to go out to the public, and it is for them to decide whether it's right or not. So this cannot fall within the domain of fake news and be restricted. That would amount to a violation of free speech, and it was refused. So this is where fake news lies, and today we have a situation where fake news is being used as a banner for either political purposes or to counter it. For instance, if some news is out there against a political you know, celebrity, they just tag it as fake news. So it's left to the public to actually segregate it. Now moving to the other aspect of your question about WhatsApp administrators, and I think it's an important issue to be addressed at a gathering like this. I can very clearly and explicitly, and believe me, no lawyer ever gives you an opinion like that. You know, and don't treat this as a legal opinion, but just as my personal opinion on this. Very categorically tell you that WhatsApp administrators cannot and should not be held liable for these things. Firstly, they are not the originators of that information. At best, they are supposed to be administrating a platform where there is an exchange of messages which they can neither stop nor regulate. Right? We were talking about liberty and regulation. So here is a domain which nobody can regulate. WhatsApp itself claims even it cannot regulate it because all these messages are now encrypted and they do not know what is being shared. So given this situation, under Indian law, section 79 of the Information Technology Act provides what is called as a safe harbor provision. What it says is that any intermediary who provides a platform where information is being shared, which that intermediary has neither control over nor originated from that intermediary, cannot be held liable for that information. The only responsibility that lies with the intermediary is that once it has been brought to the notice of the intermediary, that person, if it is within his control, has to remove it. There again, if it is not within his control, he cannot do anything about it. This provision, along with section 69, was read together along with in the Shreya Singhal case, which struck down 66A, and the Supreme Court has diluted the liability on intermediaries further to say that merely because somebody thinks that he is aggrieved, and informs the intermediary, and if the intermediary refuses, he cannot be held liable. You need a court order or an order from a government authority in due process, exercising due process for the order to be valid for the intermediary to act. Therefore, to merely jail WhatsApp administrators is nothing but posturing by government authority to, again, what I said about Aadhaar holds good here, to create a sense of fear, so that, what I told you, how the government can get into your thought. Today, as a WhatsApp administrator, whether you are liable or not, here I am standing up here and very boldly and loudly proclaiming that you are not liable. Knowing this, would you still not have that niggly of doubt in your mind? Why invite this trouble? Why not ensure that this message is deleted, right? So this is what they are trying to achieve today.
Actually, I have 3 questions. Last one, sorry. I want you to elaborate on what Mark Zuckerberg said. He said if something is very private, then you should not be doing it, right? Now, in the concept, in the context,
you should not be putting it on the internet.
You should not be doing it. That's what he said.
Yeah.
Now, in the context of liberty and 21st century, what's happening? How do you see this statement?
See, that's where the nuancing in liberty happens. When we talk about privacy itself, it is about that which you want to do without somebody looking over your shoulder, right? So the action is already there of exercising your liberty. It is about further exercising that liberty by sharing that action with multiple people. So it's not necessarily a restraint on liberty, but a restraint on the exercise of that liberty beyond a particular point. So therefore, if you have a road to travel, and if somebody says, look, if there is a railway crossing, with the level crossing down, do not cross the tracks, and if you do it, you're doing it at your own risk. That doesn't mean a curtailment of liberty, but it's a cautionary note. So I would put it that way, that you have the liberty to do that which you want to do as a private enterprise. Of course, I would again put a cautionary note there. Now, there are certain actions which you cannot do even in the privacy of your home or, absolute privacy. There are certain things where the very action itself is illegal, like child pornography or watching child pornography, etc. But except for what law does not prohibit, and where you have the liberty to do what you want in privacy, and you do not want somebody looking over your shoulder, all that he is saying is that, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of privacy as well as right to be forgotten, once you put it out there, remember that you are inviting others to invade your privacy.
Ma'am, can you give some concrete examples of dangers of Aadhaar? Like you mentioned, government has all our data. Can you give some concrete examples?
I will not be able to give it with Aadhaar per se, but I can give it with example to how data breaches have happened, right?
But Aadhaar, that is the big worry everyone is talking about, but what is the real danger?
The real danger, as I mentioned, is that one, all of this is being retained in a digital medium, and you're giving away sensitive personal information like biometrics which cannot be changed, unlike a credit or debit card number. And what cannot be changed, if it has been compromised, then where do you stand? I'll give a simple example because, we are, of course, there was the situation, I'm sure you already know about it, right? The concrete example. Pardon me for missing that. The data leak, precisely.
How does it impact somebody? That's the question.
Exactly. So when it is, there are data leaks and data leaks. If it is a data leak of your name and address, you run the risk of your privacy of your home being invaded. If it's a data leak of your name, address and personal details, you run the risk of a cybercriminal using that to his advantage. The next level of data leak of your name, personal address, personal details, medical details. There are instances and cases reported of how those medical records are misused, not just to order drugs using prescriptions issued to A or B, but also causing financial loss by using someone else's medical insurance policy, for instance. Taking this further is what I'm talking about of name, address, personal details, medical records, each bank records, your biometrics. So there is no aspect of you. What is it that the government is now trying to do? By linking everything, it is giving even the cyber criminal a one-stop shop for them to just come, have a ready-made product to take away and do what they want with it. So if we are talking about whether this is just a bogey or whether this is a genuine apprehension, the apprehension lies in the fact that no digital domain remains safe today, right? If it is only a matter of time and if it is breached, what are we looking at? I'll draw a parallel example on this. One of the things, I do not know how true it is or otherwise, but this is something we did get a lot of, again, WhatsApp messages on, of 3D printed fingers with, you know, the fingerprints for this one of these elections, right? Take that example further. Now your biometrics are out there. If it were to be breached, what is the most sacrosanct way of identifying your property with you? Isn't it your thumbprint? Now that has been compromised. We have generally not used iris scans, etc. So therefore, in that sense, it's something one above a fingerprint which also has been compromised. The argument that is being given today is, how free are we with sharing this biometric? We want to raise this big bogey about how a government entity which has exercised very heavy security collecting this information about us, but we very freely give out this information to our building, for visa applications, whoever asks us for the same biometrics, right? Tomorrow, even if the person who's delivering the courier insists that you have to give it, we are going to give it, isn't it? That's a fair argument. But the counter argument to that is very simple, and it goes back to this topic we are here to discuss today of liberty. There you have the right to say no. There you have the right to say, okay, if this country insists on this, I will not go there. But if that happens in your own country, where you're supposed to be given rights as a citizen, which are supposed to be sacrosanct, isn't that a violation of the social contract, which goes to the very root of the existence of that nation state? And therefore, that argument that you're freely giving it away when you want, but when we are asking for it, you're raising this bogey of security, according to me, cannot lie.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am. As it is raining, I'll be very quick. Thank you for a very enlightening talk.
Thank you, sir.
The talk is about liberty and laws. In my view, there is too much liberty and there are plenty of laws. I'll give you an example. In Hyderabad, if you are traveling on the road and you don't find a cop or a camera at the junction, who's stopping anyway for a red light? Okay, this is the most common thing that you observe happening. The problem is not with the laws or the lack of them. The more the problem is with the implementation. There's hardly any implementation. I'll give you some government examples. We in the IT industry have been saying for the last 3 years that every ATM machine in India, most of them at least, 90%, are on Windows XP. And we in IT knew when Windows XP became obsolete.
Yes.
The meaning of obsolete is it is not supported by Microsoft anymore. The latest viruses, the latest attacks are not prevented. So we said, okay, the disaster is waiting to happen. And it happened, right? All of a sudden, government decides that close all ATMs. What was the government doing? Okay, I'll give you another example. When WannaCry attacked, the cyber attack recently, 3 weeks back.
WannaCry.
Yeah.
WannaCry.
Yeah, WannaCry. The first group to be attacked was the police in AP government, the people who are supposed to implement cyber laws, blah, blah. The DGP was good enough to admit publicly that the attack happened because of running pirated software, which cannot be updated. Pirated software cannot be updated, just as Windows XP cannot be updated. So if the government is so relaxed, is not bothered, and is forcing the entire population into the digital world with no security whatsoever, including cash in the ATMs, no security. Windows XP doesn't exist in the rest of the world. Okay. So it's a major problem. The entire problem is with the implementation and the
Fully
regulation
agree,
authority, rather than self-regulation and laws for regulation.
So if I may quickly address that. In fact, my last chapter in my book deals with this. I'm referring to it as the broken windows in cyberspace. If you take the concept of broken windows, what does it say? It says that when somebody sees a building which is not used and they're tempted to throw a stone and break a window, and they're walking by the next day and the next day, then they see that it has not been replaced. Then they know no action is going to be taken for this vandalism. So they start throwing more stones. When some other person comes and sees so many broken windows, then they will not only break a few more windows, but that building they already know is in disuse and will start misusing it further. So then you have a small drug cartel running out of there and all kinds of problems happening. This is the broken windows theory. And I have expanded on it to the cyberspace. And when I talk cyber, I don't talk only about the online domain. I use the PESEL equivalent to say it is the political, economic, legal, social, environmental milieu which covers every aspect of cyber. So when we expand this to the cyber domain, exactly what you said happens. It is in the enforcement. If there is a lack of enforcement, if a cyber criminal is confident that there is not going to be an enforcement, then he gets emboldened. Which is why the trolling and the further very heinous acts that happen online, which are in fact being decided by the Supreme Court today in Prajwala versus Union of India. All these offenses happen because there is this sense of anonymity and security which this domain provides to you. The second aspect of your question, which is again a matter of concern, is about the absolutely digitally illiterate. And when I say that, I am talking about all of us here who are fairly highly literate otherwise, but when it comes to the digital domain, we are reasonably illiterate. So when we are being forced or being rushed, I would say, I wouldn't say forced, we are being rushed into a cashless society or a digital banking system, we are definitely running a risk of loss. What is it that we have in place for effective enforcement? What is it that we have already put in place to create awareness or provide the safety net, again what I was talking about, before we start pushing people further? So I think the government should stand back a bit to do that. One of the things that they have done to provide a safety net, and I am using it consciously in the same way I said earlier, it is a safety net if it catches you, otherwise sorry, splat, you go, is this limitation of liability circular that the RBI has come out with, where it says even if you as a victim of phishing have given out some information, you may be protected to some extent. But again, it is nuanced. So it is not like it's a 0-1 saying everything lies with the bank and everybody else is protected. So without digital literacy, without this protection and a safety net, which is an actual safety net and not just, being pretentiously one, we are running a risk. So I would strongly advise that we have to first create the layers of protection, ensure expeditious enforcement, because when the Indian Evidence Act was enacted, I'm sure going by the way the provisions are that they envisaged the matter getting over within 6 months. Today we are looking at 20 and 30 years. We now have the Commercial Courts Act, which says you have to complete it within 2 years. I was privileged enough to be part of that. But having been part of the drafting of that enactment, I as a practitioner am fully aware of the problems that arise with actually meeting those deadlines. So when you have electronic evidence on one hand, which is fairly difficult and complicated to prove, you have a digitally illiterate populace, you do not have effective or speedy enforcement mechanisms, you do not have remedies for breaches. Be cautious.
I think we'll close it. It's raining and everyone's...
By way of probably proportionate representation, we'll take that as the last question.
Sorry, with the kind permission, I want to voice my opinion. I'm sorry.
Please.
After hearing such an absorbing lecture, I want to institute a comparison technology, computer world, with the banyan tree, which has its roots penetrating under the earth too far and becoming so rigid enough that it is leaving the illiterate and the skilled worker, this thing, at lurch, in the lurch, and they are being kept astray from the actual technology.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Truly, it also leads to this last topic we had about digital illiteracy, and I think on that note, I would like to thank you all for being out here.
If the rains had not come, this discussion would have carried on for another half an hour. But I think we are forced to curtail this.
Yes.
Many thanks to you for coming over and spending this evening with us. It was very nice. May I ask, Hari?
My
please offer
pleasure
a small
completely,
memento
sir.